Sony and Gen Design's The Last Guardian was in development for almost 10 years. The game was originally announced with great fanfare in 2009, but that hype and anticipation fizzled into doubt after the game's curious absence from public view for many years. All of which was further compounded by the on-again, off-again partnership between Sony and the game's lead designer Fumito Ueda. Amidst delays and the prospective platform change from PlayStation 3 to the then upcoming PlayStation 4, Ueda left Sony and the Last Guardian project in 2011, stating that he, quote, felt a sense of crisis within himself about a lot of things. Sony corralled teams from various corners of the company, including their Santa Monica studio, and PS4 lead architect Mark Cerny to work on improving the game's performance and ultimately adapting it for the new console. However, Ueda did ultimately return to work on the game through his independent studio Gen Design in 2013. 3 years after that, the finished game was finally released after one final 2-month delay that pushed it to December of 2016. Suffice to say, The Last Guardian had a rocky, protracted development. And after all that work, The Last Guardian actually did receive a lot of praise from critics. Yet, most reviews also called out certain technical elements of the game as clunky or frustrating. In other words, there was a lot of, hey, the story is great, but, the camera gets stuck sometimes, or, hey, the ending, that moved me to tears. However, sometimes the frame rate dips. Some reviews criticized the game for incorporating what they saw as older design frameworks, saying it plays like a PlayStation 2 game. The connotation seems to be that PlayStation 2 games are bad? I don't know exactly. Still, truth be told, The Last Guardian does have moments where the camera gets stuck on a wall, or I overshoot a jump because I don't always have pinpoint control over the player character's movements. But isn't there something to be said for the existence of visible residue from a tumultuous development process within the game itself? I think so. Yes, the game does have remnants of certain older ideas and notions of interactivity, but, shouldn't it? That's true to what The Last Guardian is and how it came to be. Part of looking at games as objects also means looking at them as documents of creative labor, and The Last Guardian has some fascinating footnotes that not only denote this process, but, I'd argue, further reinforce the game's core themes. In many cases, the technical or design aspects that displeased critics were instances where the flow of the game was interrupted in some way. Think of the feeling of flow as being kind of in the zone with a game, where players are fully immersed in the illusion of the game world through graphical fluidity and constant rates of progress against the game's challenges. When flow is interrupted, it can be like someone briefly flipping on the house lights in a movie theater, resetting the audience's immersion in the film by reminding them that they're just a person sitting in a squeaky chair next to 30 other people staring at a large, glowing rectangle. When the illusion of the Last Guardian spectacle breaks because of camera wonkiness or last-gen road blocking, it reiterates the game's gameness. Video games are objects after all, and not perfect geometric shapes either. The Last Guardian itself is an amorphous shape to be sure, with rigid angles in some places and amoebic curves in others. It's a hybrid of organic forms like Trico and the Boy, juxtaposed with unyielding architectural structures that they navigate together. And so, you'll get these moments where you and Trico enter a tight hallway, and the camera seems to literally get smashed between Trico's body and a stone archway. The screen stutters, you pivot the right stick around to try and find some stability and some room to breathe. The net effect is characters and environment in conflict. The video game form mimics the recurring instances of crumbling towers that can't support the weight of Trico and the Boy. The framework of the space struggles against them. Fumito Ueda has said that the team didn't use motion capture to construct the animations for Trico, instead creating animated keyframes that are triggered procedurally based on certain contexts. This means that, for the most part, Trico's animations flow very organically from one position to the next. The Boy also had this feeling of procedural animation, but because players directly control the Boy, his animations feel loose and at times wild, not wholly dissimilar from the fumbling robot Bud in Reflection's Grow Home series. I missed a solid half-dozen jumps my first time through the game because I didn't approach the edge of a ledge at just the right angle, or I thought the Boy should have turned more in midair than he actually did. Intentional or not, this serves to make the Boy feel all the more incapable. It's much easier to climb on Trico and let the beast handle traversal sections where possible. And while the Boy's animation makes him an unreliable jumper, it does allow for the Boy to latch onto and climb Trico from just about any angle. Thus the jump feels less like a Super Mario vault, and more like a leap of faith, praying for a furry handhold on the other side. You don't jump confidently in The Last Guardian because the controls imbue a sense of doubt. The main thematic focus of the game is the bond you form with Trico over time, so it actually seems quite fitting that movement is more comfortable when the two are physically conjoined rather than separated. But the interruption of flow doesn't always need to be these seemingly unintentional design facets. They can also be built into the core narrative structure. In The Last Guardian, the Boy and Trico are often halted from proceeding from one room to the next until you complete some banal task. Notably, these tasks often take more time to execute through trial and error than they take to mentally figure out. oh, this drawbridge needs to be pulled up. I bet there would be a pathway if I could just flip the switch over there. Or, I need to give these food barrels to Trico, but I keep misdirecting my tosses and they fall down to that hole where I found them, and it's really a pain to get them out. To be fair, a few puzzles are slightly trickier than that, but switch throwing and barrel hunting in particular recur with regular frequency. This is just a guess, but I think these are the kind of segments that reviewers saw as outdated and potentially PS2-like. I'll concede that these challenges can feel quite like some of the environmental puzzle solving in Ueda's earlier game, Eco, which was a PlayStation 2 game released in 2001. I just don't think that makes them bad. On the most basic level, these segments are training simulations, both in terms of teaching Trico how to interact with the environment, and for the boy, learning how to take care of a pet. Care is the operative word here. Throughout The Last Guardian, the boy and Trico tend to one another's needs and do so repeatedly. At the end of a battle scene, you have to clamber onto Trico and pet it to calm it down. Then you have the option of climbing around the animal, removing spears, and wiping away blood. These tasks are literally chores, and I can easily envision a parental visage of Ueda looking down upon me and saying, if you want to have a Trico, you're gonna have to take responsibility for it. You have to feed it, you have to clean it, you gotta take it for walks. So it doesn't matter that it's not fun to throw barrels with very finicky physics onto frustratingly slanted platforms just to get them within snacking range. The game will not move forward until you do it. But let's say you're not on board with all this, and thank you for watching this far if that's actually the case. Let's say that given an ideal set of circumstances, designers would fix all the flow-breaking components I've been talking about. Well, part of what endears me so much to The Last Guardian is that it strikes a balance between lulling players with its illusionary spaces and characters, while still at times revealing itself to be a rough-hewn video game. Consider what would be lost if all those wrinkles were ironed out. The game would be a frictionless experience, an exercise in flow rather than a simulation of a companionship. The game, as a document of its long, fractured development, would be gone, and the themes of persistence and partnership would be less resonant within the form itself. So while I think noting technical deficiencies in games is certainly warranted, perhaps labeling these components as inherently negative is applying an outdated set of critical standards. And even still, The Last Guardian's perceived hiccups pale in comparison to his achievements. Trico is a landmark in video game character and interaction design, not just because there's a dedicated pet button, though that certainly helps. Because while it can certainly be jarring to be taken out of the flow of a game because of a bug or a hitch, it's to The Last Guardian's credit that it can so reliably pull you right back in. After all, the big payoff of The Last Guardian isn't that it tricks players into caring about an animal that isn't real, it's that it convinces players that a video game animal can actually be worth caring for.